Hi guys, as we close out 2023 and move into 24, I thought I'd share with you a few tips from things I have learned during 2023 and what has been a very busy 12 months. Now, I've been doing professional football photography for nearly 10 years now, and if there's one thing I've learned is that you never stop learning. Every season, almost every game to be honest, still brings things that you either weren't expecting or updates what you previously thought or just teaches you something new. And so in this video, I'm going to quickly go through some of the main learnings I've taken from this year and how some things have changed and maybe others haven't. So the first thing I want to talk about is something that has really frustrated me on a few occasions over the last year, most recently just a month or two ago. And that is this kind of, I want to call it a COVID hangover from a regulatory point of view, but not really regulations broadly speaking. To give you the backdrop then, back in COVID time, there was that one season where the entire English football season was played behind closed doors. So no fans were allowed in. And during that, the whole idea of a red zone became quite prevalent and photographers were not allowed in the red zone. So that meant, by and large, they weren't allowed near the dugouts, they weren't allowed certainly anywhere near the tunnel, and they weren't even allowed pitch side. They had to be behind the hoardings, which was, I think, the amber zone that was called at the time. And that was all fair enough, perfectly understandable, everyone's safety in mind, fine, not a problem. Since COVID, well, COVID's still with us, but since that season has kind of ebbed into the distant past, most things are back to normal, totally normal as they would have been beforehand. But there are a couple of grounds who, I don't know whether they've found benefit in ways that things were done during COVID or they've just wanted to maybe not clarify things, I don't know. But some of the ambiguity now that you find, or ambiguity that you find now at pitch side is really quite frustrating. So take this example. I'm not going to name the ground, but within the last 2 months, maybe 3 months, I was covering a game on a Tuesday night in League Two, and I always make a point of firstly reading any instructions. So in the Dataco app that you get as an accredited photographer, when you're accepted into a game, there'll be attachments or instructions for how photographers and media people should behave and what they should do, different instructions in the stadium. So I always make a point of trying to read those before the game, before I arrive. Secondly, when you get your lanyard, when you arrive at the game and you check in, that lanyard used to have a pitch map on it with the different zones marked and coloured out, and it'd tell you as well which zones you're allowed in. That still does happen, not as clearly as it did during COVID time, but there is still something like that in most grounds going on. Third and finally, whenever I go to any ground, and I made this point in a video about 2 years ago I did just on how to photograph professional football, I always make it my point to ask where I'm allowed to go when I go to a stadium I'm not used to or I haven't been for a long time. That's always been what I try and do. So this Tuesday night match I was at, I'd read the instructions beforehand, I'd collected my accreditation, I'd put my bib on and I'd gone to pitch side ready to start shooting. And just before the teams came out, I was just off to the side by the away dugout, but a little bit further along. And a steward, I think he was a senior steward, came up to me and said, "Excuse me, sir, you're not allowed here, you're in the red zone. It's quite clear that you're not allowed in the red zone." So I said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, didn't realise, I'll move." And he said, "Well, you're already here now, so you may as well stay, but just to let you know for next time." Fine. Carried on, did my job. And it wasn't until later that night or later in the game, it really started to frustrate me the more I thought about it, because I always make a point of not getting in the way and making sure I only go where I go. But I reviewed my lanyard. Again, I reviewed the instructions given before the game, and there's no mention of a red zone. There was no map to suggest where that red zone may be, if it existed. Red zone as a phrase is something very seldom used since COVID. So this red zone was suddenly back. It was something that I was having to adhere to, but it didn't mention anywhere. It didn't tell me where it was. And that's been the case for at least one other ground this season as well. So I find that really frustrating. So I guess a tip here for you is when you are shooting at a ground, double check and triple check where you are allowed to go and where you aren't allowed to go. And if there's no pitch map on your lanyard or on your instructions, which maybe at a really lower level you wouldn't get, but certainly at professional level, Football League and International League here in the UK, you would get. If you haven't got one, then definitely ask the question. All right, my second learning or reaffirming something I've always believed this year was to always brave the weather in the hope that you might get that great shot. And this paid off for me again just about 3 weeks ago, maybe less. We had a game in League Two at home to Newport and the weather was absolutely horrendous. It was gale force winds, it was heavy rain, mostly through all the game, I think. And at one end of Tranmere Stadium, the photographers are asked to sit behind the hoardings, only because there's not much runoff between that and the pitch. And the first few rows of the stand have been, the seats have been removed, so it's a bit safer to sit there. What this also does is it provides you a little bit of cover as well. The opposite end of the pitch is a bit more open. You can sit pitch side, but the wind really howls in the corner and blows all the rain over you. There's normally some broken drainage in the roof of the stand that seems to drop on my cases every single game as well, because I always sit in the same place. But anyway, so first half, Tranmere 1-0 down, half time. The weather's really grim still, and there's 4 photographers sat in the away end. So I was one of them. I stay right at the front, despite getting a bit of rain on me. So on the first row, the other 3 guys move further up the stand to get away from the bad weather. I don't like that because you're shooting at a higher angle. Now, with the exception of maybe pre-season friendlies, if the weather's bad, or maybe an EFL trophy game that's not very important and doesn't have much interest on it, I will try to never sit too high up a stand. I might take my laptop up if the stand's empty and wire some images just to save getting the laptop tent out and keeping that dry, and I'll take a camera just in case anything happens. But by and large, I'll stay low down at pitch side if I can. And so at half time, when Tranmere were losing, the weather was grim, I swapped ends and went to sit in a nice exposed corner, if you like, up at the other end of the stadium. The other 3 guys, great blokes, all of them, not got a bad word to say about any of them. They took their choice to sit, stay dry, keep the gear nice and dry, and shoot from where they were. And that's absolutely fine, each to their own. However, Tranmere equalised, and then in the 89th minute, I think, so a minute from full time, they scored a dramatic and quite important late winning goal. And the celebrations came right to me. I got some great celebration shots from that, of that dramatic winner, used heavily on social media. Really nice shots just to me to have. The players themselves loved them as well, the ones I spoke to. So I got my reward. I was absolutely drenched after the game. I was soaked, I was cold, I was miserable in terms of my gear was going to need to be dried out and all that. But by braving the weather and putting up with all of that, I got some brilliant shots that none of the other photographers working at that game got, because the decision they made, and again, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, do what you want, but instead of opting to stay dry, and I won't say warm, it certainly wasn't warm, but instead of staying dry and out of the elements, I decided to sit in them, and I got my reward for them. Now, that's like a best case scenario. That's why it reminded me recently, because so often I will sit and I'll get absolutely soaked, and after the game I'm kind of like, I wish I'd have gone and sat with the other guys halfway up the stand. But you do get your reward for braving out in the bad weather. So if I was to offer any advice, as long as you've got waterproof covers or your cameras are really, really weatherproof, try and brave it in the weather, because you will, from time to time, get rewarded with a great shot that no one else gets. My next tip is to be agile, and by that I mean just be able to pack up your gear, know where it goes, and be able to pack it up and move on really, really quickly. And I say this mostly because at the end of some games, towards the end of the season, you might have a pitch invasion or something might happen. It's easier if you can just quickly pack your gear away and get ready to move. It makes all the difference. I was reminded of this back in May when I shot final league game of the season, Tranmere at home to Northampton. I think I did a video on it at the time. And Northampton won promotion, and so they had 2,000 fans there, and probably 1,500 of them invaded the pitch. Great scenes, but you never know if there's one bad fan amongst them who actually wants to wave your laptop in the air or run off with your camera or trip over it by accident and kick it or whatever. So being ready to pack your gear up and be able to very quickly get it away and on your back or however you carry it, and be able to move yourself in case anything happens by way of a safety threat for you, I think is really, really important. And in those big games where those pitch invasions could happen, I'd very much recommend packing most of your gear up a couple of minutes before the end. I will usually do that myself and leave only out the essential equipment like my main body and lens. Everything else will be packed up and ready for me to move on that full-time whistle. So A, I can go and get more shots if the promotion party happens up the other end of the pitch. But B, if there is a concern for the safety of my gear or myself, I've got everything with me within seconds and I'm ready to get out of there and move to somewhere else. So that is definitely something to consider. One negative point on being able to pack up quick and leave. I said about learning things all the time. I am clumsy. I say that in loads of videos. That Newport game I mentioned in the really bad weather, I had to get off at full time really quickly to get home for a prearranged event we had going on. And so when full time whistle went, I edited the last few photos, took my memory cards out that I hadn't transferred images off, put them to one side with the intention of when I get home and I'm done with what I had to go and do, I can get the memory cards out later tonight and just have a run through of all the other images, see if there's anything I need to use or wire to the club. What actually happened is I was in that much of a rush, I was that quick at packing up that I scooted off, got in the car, and it wasn't until I was halfway home in the car, and the weather, by the way, at this point was still horrendous, and I was like, I did not pick my memory cards up, and I'd left them in horrendous weather. Luckily, the ground staff at Tranmere are great people. They got one back to me that night and the next one back to me the following week, but did manage to get the images off them and transfer them to me on the Saturday night. Brilliant of them to do so. Really clumsy of me to leave 2 memory cards behind and exposed to the elements. I will hopefully not be doing that again. Okay, so if there's one thing we have heard so much about in 2023, it is artificial intelligence or AI. And there's probably umpteen number of videos I can do discussing AI and the impact on photographers, on photography, and what it could mean by way of both a threat and an opportunity. I mentioned opportunity because if you're familiar with Photoshop's generative fill, you'll know that there are some great elements of AI that we can utilize in bits of photography. However, some things I've noticed recently is that AI, in many cases, can remove a watermark from a photo, which is really not cool. So this tip is just something to be aware of, really, is what your watermark's like. Can it be removed by AI? Probably. Do we need to make it somehow more complicated so that it's more difficult for AI to do? I don't even know if that's possible, but it's just something to be aware of, going into 2024, is AI and its ability to remove our watermarks. Penultimate tip I have learned or had remembered to me this year is to make sure you run any laptop updates and prepare your laptop for a shoot before the actual event itself or the game itself. I will usually try and set my laptop up on a Friday night just to make sure it's fully charged, the subfolders I need are created, the export settings from Lightroom are created, and all those different things are in place ready for me to shoot on a Saturday. A couple of months ago, I fell into the trap of not being able to do this on a Friday. And Saturday morning, I remembered I hadn't done it, and when I turned it on, the Mac went into doing an update because when I'd shut it down, it had probably told me next time we restart, we're going to update. It did an update, and then Photoshop also wanted to do an update because I said it's not running the best experience or something. And this reminded me of an experience a couple of years ago, or probably about 5 years ago. And I went to a game and Lightroom decided to do an update, and I think it took probably about 60 minutes of the 90-minute game of the laptop sat there, not plugged in, so using what battery I had to do an update. And it just reminded me, make sure when you are setting your laptop up, yes, make sure it's got full charge and get your settings and your folders and everything ready for the game and your captions if you're using them. But also just check that no updates are imminent or are required, because sometimes they can take hours in some cases. I remember having a Windows laptop many years ago, and that used to take 4 or 5 hours towards the end of its life to do like a system update. You don't want to accidentally click go on one of those at 2 o'clock when you've got a game at 3 o'clock, for example. So it pays to check in advance. Now, the last tip I want to give you is to try and build relationships if you're kind of shooting the same team or the same athlete frequently. If there's a chance to maybe make a relationship with them, it pays from a photography point of view, or certainly can do, to do that. Now, at no point in the 10 years I've been photographing Tranmere have I wanted to or tried to become best friends with any players or anything like that. I always try and keep my distance. They've got a job to do, I've got a job to do. But there is definitely an overlap. And over the years, as more players have been in touch and asked for certain photos, and I've got to know some of them and kind of talked to them before games and after games, it's good, because what I see a lot of now, or more increasingly, is players kind of get to know where I sit, and so they'll come and they'll celebrate goals by me, for example, which, and they're the shots as a football photographer you want the goal celebrations. So also you're around their place of work, so it pays to kind of be friendly and be known to them anyway, and it kind of puts them at ease a little bit. But certainly from a photography perspective, don't be overly friendly and unprofessional and weird. But certainly if they ask for photos or something like that, some photographers will be quite reluctant to send them. And I get, if you're paid, working on a paid gig for an agency, you might not be able to do that, which is fine. But as a club photographer, I will send some images back to players, because you know what, next time they score a goal, they kind of know where I sit at home games. You saw maybe on a recent video where I had that great celebration at Mansfield where the player ran straight to me. This happens, I think, mainly because they know who I am. They know roughly where I sit. And so it pays to kind of be that professional, friendly face and try and make those relationships. Because from a photography perspective, and in terms of you getting the best image and the image you want, is nothing more frustrating than when players run the opposite side of the pitch, which still will happen regardless sometimes. But you want to give yourself the best chance. And if you're talking to those players and you say, oh, first half, I'll be in my usual corner. You know, I've had a chat with substitutes when they're warming up on the touchline during games. And I've said, if you score, mate, come over here, give us a celebration. Only light-hearted, kind of jokey, because I know them and I've got that relationship to be able to say that. And so when I get that celebration, when that happens, it's well worth doing. So that's my final tip. Don't be over the top. Don't be kind of getting involved where you don't need to or shouldn't. But if the opportunity to build some sort of basic relationship with any of the kind of the players you cover does come along, then try and be polite, try and be friendly and professional, because it can positively impact your photography and get you some better shots. And that's it. That's going to bring 2023 rapidly to a close. I hope you've all had a great year, and I wish you all the happiest year going into 2024. I'll be producing a load more videos on my channel, including one looking at refreshing my how to photograph football video that is really popular every year. So please consider subscribing to my video, and I'll see you again soon.